Isabel and Jose, thank you. Good evening, and thanks to each of you for being here, and to Jose for inviting me to be part of your semester. It's an honor. I was in Porto a few years ago and had such a fun, inspiring time in your cool city, so I'm really sorry that I can't be with you in person, but someday. A touch on beauty. Like everything around us, the profession of landscape architecture continues to evolve, but for me, our pursuit is still about what it's always been about, creating places for people that stir their hearts and minds because they are distinct, evocative, enriching, because they're beautiful. I've been practicing the capstone studio at UC Berkeley for the past 20 years, and it has been a significant and super rewarding facet of my career. And without a doubt, the most important thing that I bring to my students is my sensibility and experience as a practitioner. I'm all about making things. And I couldn't possibly run a successful practice without this talented and passionate team. Here's our small but mighty crew. I am so lucky to see them throughout the week and truly love working with them. And I believe some of them have Zoomed in tonight to keep me honest. Our intention is not to be the biggest or most prolific firm. Others cover that territory primarily as business models. But at this point in my career, I'm sincerely interested in doing fewer things exceptionally well. We strive to design and build revelatory places that connect with the people who experience them, because every facet of the design is carefully conceived and executed. Our studio's methodology honors two aspects of a whole experience. First, a concept emerges from the nature of a place, its location, its ecosystems, inhabitants, its history, and its heroes. Second, there is the translation of a concept into reality, when program, proportion, form, light, materiality, and nature's rich spectrum come into play. This purposeful approach, this synthesis of concept, design, and physicality results in places that have presence that stay with you, that you can hopefully describe as beautiful. But while beauty is always, for me, the end game, as designers, we're always expected to meet program goals and address countless challenges. That could be anything from fitting buildings onto a site, to meeting LEED goals, to complying with codes, to ensuring that spaces serve a diverse community. Increasingly, landscape architects are addressing and anticipating the effects of climate change. So while I have a range of work to share with you today or tonight, I'd like to start with Heartwood Preserve, because at its core, it is a reverie on nature and a changing planet. Taking shape in Omaha, Nebraska, which is smack dab in the middle of North America, it is one of the largest urban spaces under development in the United States. The 200-hectare Heartwood site was once part of Boys Town, an institution founded by Father Flanagan to care for orphans. This was the last vestige of farmland that had been surrounded by urban sprawl, a sad example of our need to develop every square inch of land. Our client, Applied Underwriters, had plans to develop the site that would anchor their corporate campus. The expansive site is also within a watershed ravaged by storms, an increasingly common weather pattern that has cost the Omaha community many homes, farms, and more than $1 billion in damages recently. So reshaping and rethinking the watershed for flood control was essential for the development that included 17 hectares for the Applied Underwriters headquarters, a 10-hectare central park, a pedestrian promenade that is framed by housing and retail. It will link the park to the jewel of Heartwood Preserve, the greenways. With more than 35 hectares of open space composed of native prairie and forest ecosystems, the greenways provided us with the necessary grounds to store 225,000 cubic meters of stormwater. When we first interviewed for the project, the engineers had already planned and built a series of unremarkable ponds that were pushed to the boundaries of the project, not really considered as an aesthetic component. They were all about function, but they weren't functioning very well. With the epic storm events that happened in just the past 3 years, erosion and siltation were quickly undermining the ponds. Supported by Applied Underwriters' desire to go beyond the expected, our team got on board and created a new vision for the site, one that expressed a hyper-efficient hydraulic infrastructure as sculpture in the park. Prioritizing both aesthetics and function, we conceived a series of open spaces that are united by a sinuous progression of stylized basins that we call vessels to collect stormwater. Highlighted here in blue, the vessels are the backbone of infrastructure and have become the signature facet of Heartwood Preserve. I'll show you some of the models and drawings that helped us tell the story to our client and to the community. Due to space restrictions, this vessel takes on a strong linear expression and is reinforced by an alley of columnar trees that frame a pedestrian promenade along the vessel. While the vessels are all designed to collect stormwater, you'll see that they're very different and that each one speaks to its context. For example, this is the axial bowl, which terminates the present pedestrian promenade. These are the crescent vessels, which were the first to be built. And here's what we call the cosmic bowl. More than 125 meters across, it's the largest vessel of them all. Its strength of form and grand scale provides the park with its most distinctive feature. If necessary, these vessels need to hold a total of 220 million liters of water, so each one has a sizable footprint on the land. And each translates into a clearing. Whether full of water, marshy, or dry, the vessels and their surroundings become poetic reveals of the constantly changing landscape. Here's the cosmic bowl once again, notable because it harkens back to the historic pothole prairies in Nebraska. We also honor the agrarian past by planting an orchard that sweeps between the crescent vessels. It's our nod to Arbor Day, which originated in Nebraska. We'll be planting over 10,000 trees throughout the development. To make that possible, we're establishing their own nurseries within the greenways, which gave birth to a cool program where every Applied Underwriter employee gets to choose and plant a memorial sapling. And what about the trees that have to be removed to make way for the clearings? We'll be replanting them throughout the park as totems. As they decay, the totems will provide habitat for native woodpeckers, nuthatches, and chickadees. The vessels also set up all sorts of activities within the park, no matter the season. And studded within the clearings are all sorts of amenities like council rings, fire pits, mini amphitheaters, and these stone cairns that you see on the right that provide shelter and become park follies. I thought I would talk about our process for a minute, especially for you students who are moving earth around in your studios. We still establish our parties with paper, pencil, and intuition. Since design is always in a flow state, gestures evolve over many iterations of study and critique, and a hell of a lot of trace and modeling. We continue to refine the compositions through design development until we ultimately have a rigorous set of construction documents completed. drawings that I find beautiful in their own right. The project broke ground last summer, so I don't have a lot of built work to show tonight, but here is the first basin under construction, the upper crescent vessel. It's nearly 150 meters across, 5 meters deep, and is constructed of natural materials, earth and dry stacked native limestone. I want to call out how we're bringing attention to how water enters the vessel, even celebrating it. You can see in this illustration, water cascading down over the stone at the center of the ark. Here's one under construction where you can see that we're integrating the storm pipe into the stone blocks with weathered steel frames. And I think this gives you a sense of scale. Each vessel also has an overflow catch basin, which allows water to slowly drain in the wake of severe storm. Again, we're concealing this civil structure with something beautiful, a dry stacked limestone cairn. Like all vessels, regardless to the height of the water level, the shape of the water always expresses intentional forms of shaping the earth. Over time, 15 years, 20 years, 100 years, nature will leave its mark on the stone and tell a story. Basically, these elements make what is invisible visible. Most of Nebraska's original ecosystems have been transformed into agriculture. Rich topsoil has eroded away and only a fraction of the native landscape remains. So naturally, we're taking a restorative approach, rebuilding ecosystems, revitalizing soil, water, vegetation, and the wildlife that depends on them. And that's more essential than ever. But thankfully, these practices have always been essentials of our trade. We think our mission goes beyond that. What we're doing here is more of an ecological art form. Throughout this site, in monumental and intimate ways, we're fusing art with natural elements. We're creating a landscape for our age by bringing nature's ebb and force to the foreground. We're encouraging people to bear witness to the seismic shifts to our environment. Over time, the Heartwood experience will hopefully foster awareness and a connection to the natural world. And maybe this way of creating climate change infrastructure might help people see what we're doing to our planet and further the idea of what a public park can and should be. As you likely can tell, we're very excited about the opportunity to design this and build this place. I consider it the seminal project in my 40-ish year career. Yet I doubt I could have done it justice if I hadn't had all of my previous experiences. I say that because I know that most of you are in the early chapters of your career, that you have so much to explore and discover. I want to remind you that everything you do and make matters. Any designer is always peeling back layers and building on more layers to arrive at and evolve their aesthetic. I'll show a few other projects that have taught us a lot of lessons that have developed a profound respect for right physicality. I love to build things. I love to build them well. While it's wonderful to birth an idea, half the fun, and I believe my responsibility to the profession, is making an idea real. I call it physicality because construction or execution doesn't address the magic and rigor required to turn a design into a beautifully crafted space. Often incredible odds, you're dealing with everything from the relationship of materials to the elusive nature of light, living plants that always have minds of their own, and contractors or clients that too often have a mind of their own. Any discussion of physicality always brings me to the Yorkville Park in Toronto. I'll give you a little bit of history. When the city wiped down a block of Victorian row houses in the 1950s to accommodate a new subway, the village of Yorkville was left with this unsightly parking lot. After 50 years, Toronto held a competition to replace the parking lot with a park, and here's the outcome of our winning solution. The idea was a riff on the Victorians' proclivity to collect specimens of nature, bones, insects, and fossils. We saw the Block Lawn Park as a stylized collection of Canadian landscapes, ranging from the upland pine grove on the right to the bottomland collections on the left. While all the collections represent native landscapes, they're intentionally stylized. Given that this is an urban park that sits atop a subway, we took some liberties in how we express them. Here's the pine grove, complete with misting neon pipes. Had we tried to display these landscapes naturally, I think they would have looked, well, unnatural. Next to the pine grove is the prairie. Misters beyond in the pine grove are timed to go off 1 minute before the subway is scheduled to arrive. Next to the prairie is the birch grove. This is the herbaceous rock garden. Each garden has its own unique character, providing different zones for people to gather. And down in the bottomland collections, there's the marsh, a bittersweet arbor, and to the clearing, where we wanted to do justice to the beloved waterways of Canada. We stayed true to our stylized approach and decided to represent the water and the seasons with a linear fountain. During the summer, it's a diaphanous cooling curtain of water. And in the winter, it becomes an ever-changing collection of icicles. This being our most challenging feature to design, I want to speak to the importance of crafting your work. In a recent lecture, Mark Tribe, an architectural critic and author from UC Berkeley, talked about the importance of crafting our work and that if we want a truly artistic outcome, we have to go beyond the pragmatics to reach the poetic. He said, while an idea remains the genesis of a poet's work, we write poems with words, not ideas, which really resonates with me. While Yorkville Park was a great idea, it's a successful place because of how well it was executed. So I'm just going to deconstruct our poem a little bit for you. I never tried to wrangle ice before and was told by our first fountain consultant that it was impossible. So after saying adios to them, I found another consultant who helped me build this mock-up. On the left is a sketch that illustrated all of the things that I wanted to test and see, a case where mock-ups were essential. We studied cable types, cable spacing, and the heat tracing of water, confirming our concept. And then once we had that desired effect, we detailed the guts, structural members, hundreds of dribblers, a series of spitters, and then we designed this operable shroud designed in 2 pieces so that it could hinge open for maintenance. All of which without compromising the form of the shroud. One of the things I think is really nice about the feature is the way it changes over time. Not only from summer rain to winter ice, but the ice itself changes dramatically. Initially, you get a collection of delicate icicles on each cable. And other times you see these chunkier formations, welcoming nature to participate in the composition. Lastly, we come to the clearing of the open plaza of the park. Here we place the granddaddy specimen of them all, a 600-ton piece of the Canadian Shield, which you see illustrated here in our conceptual rendering. This was, without a doubt, the most ambitious and controversial piece, and I'll spare you the battles. That's a different lecture that came with this, moving this rock into Toronto, except to say that it was an example of fighting hard for what you believe in, as the rock now has become the iconic destination for all of Yorkville and a venue for musical events and activities. Moving on to smaller projects, this is an office remodel at 888 Brandon Street in San Francisco, home of the existing Jewelry Mart and now the new headquarters for Airbnb. Our role was to transform this loading dock into a hip and happening gathering place. We anchored the courtyard with a specimen tree on access with the corridor that leads to Airbnb's main lobby. Here's where the loading dock used to be. Whoops, let me go back to that. The corridor here's where the loading dock used to be, the corridor to Airbnb headquarters. And here's the breezeway that borders the courtyard, which leads you into the jewelry center. To further distinguish the space and to honor the jewelry mart, we imagined placing a giant piece of jewelry at the base of the tree. We told the client we could create something really stunning for about $250,000. They said, no way. What can you do for $35,000? So we started thinking more in terms of semi-precious stones, and I'll get back to that in a minute. First, here's our specimen tree, a gorgeous 12-meter tall Acer rubrum that had to be carefully extracted, protected, and transported from the valley, and then lifted over the 6-story building and placed just so in the loading dock. We then backfilled the loading dock with soil and then capped it with decking that's suspended over the imported soils. Now back to the semi-precious stones. We looked at lots of stones and study models, and when we found the ones that we wanted, we found a company who could fabricate them to a T in 3 different sizes. The courtyard is now a hangout spot during the day and really comes to life at night with the lighting of the newly clad walls that bring a different ambiance to this space. The next project is 270 Brannan, now home of Splunk headquarters. When we designed this project, we didn't know who the tenant was going to be, but we did know that any outdoor environment for corporate culture must please their tenants as a place to work, dine, and play. Here's an illustration of our proposal, which features a glass roof that creates a protected exterior space and functions as a sustainable water feature. To accommodate a range of activities, custom furnishings were placed to frame a series of rooms along one side of the court, leaving the other half of the court open to accommodate larger gatherings. Above, the valley of the roof collects water that is then released at the end of the atrium, where we designed a sculptural splash pad to celebrate the capturing of water. And here's the splash pad at the foundry, which is fabricated into one piece out of glass fiber reinforced concrete. And whether it's quiet dripping of fog, a gentle rain is shown here, or a roaring cascade that comes with a storm, the design celebrates the capture of water. The water then is shed to the planters to water the plants, then drains to a cistern in the basement, which is then used to flush toilets. So a full service fountain that comes free of charge. In a different sculptural vein is Battery East in San Francisco, where we shape the land to achieve a very specific program, celebrate this San Francisco treasure, and take advantage of this gorgeous view. At a location where a eucalyptus grove once stood, the Park Service wanted to develop a vista point and help reveal the hillside batteries from the Civil War era. The challenge was that in addition to the thousands of pedestrians admiring the view, 6,000 bicyclists pass through this space every day. So our first move was to address this ambitious program was to level the site so that the parking lot and viewing area can be 100% accessible under 2% pitch. Outlined in red, you can see the historic gun batteries that dot the hillside. And the grading design that balanced cut and fill allowed us to relocate the bike lanes so that they were below the vista. Here's the before shot where everybody shared the same space. And here it is after construction. The area for pedestrians and the one for bikers are now separated by an arc of stadium seats with an elevated lookout that now gives the tourists a better shot at their Instagram moments. And to help them spot the other notable locations that rim the bay, we designed these viewing scopes and placed them along the ridge of the plaza. I borrowed this idea from something I saw in Rome, a keyhole in an embassy gate that was centered on the Vatican. The last project that I'll share with you today is called Limelight, a temporary installation at the National Arboretum of England. The idea was to celebrate what the Brits call a champion tree, the largest of its kind in that country. If you will, the goal of topography here was to honor a tree. We imagined hanging an earthen medallion around this majestic sycamore maple and saw the medallion as a simple crescent, framing the tree and setting it apart from the rest of the grove. Reaching a height of 4 meters, the sculpted arc also created a mini amphitheater that encouraged people to pause and, to our delight, admire the champion tree. Sculpted on earth, Limelight provides a strong mark on the land and exemplifies the type of work that we aspire to do. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with this. As landscape architects, it's our responsibility to create effective, livable, sustainable places that serve all people and that safeguard the ecosystems of our planet. But if we're really living up to the promise of our noble profession, I hope we can commit to making places that transcend, that provide affirming, empowering experiences because they are meticulously designed and built, because they're beautiful. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Let's open it up and talk. What else can we tell you?